Good morning, all. Thank you. I should say also good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be joining us from. Thank you for joining us for this session today on critical tax reforms for shared prosperity. My name is Taiwo Yedele. I'll be the moderator for today's session. We welcome all our guests, our panelists, as well as participants that have joined us. We appreciate your time and commitment to our national project. So this session is one of the pre-summit series leading up to the NES 28, and that's the Nigerian Economic Summit 28. Without wasting time, I already introduced myself. I'm the thematic lead for the Fiscal Policy and Planning unit of the TICPC, which is on Trade Commission of the NESG. I'm also the Fiscal Policy Partner and Africa Task Leader at PwC. We will start by taking the National Anthem.
Is the National Anthem going on?
I'm not hearing it.
Can you hear me? Yeah, we can hear you clearly.
Okay, so it seems like people didn't hear the National Anthem.
Not at all. We didn't hear anything.
Did you hear it, Mr. Taiwo?
Yes, I was playing it, so I heard it. So I thought everybody heard it.
It was obviously it was not connected to the computer you were using.
Yeah, I didn't connect the audience.
Okay, so apologies about that. I think in the interest of time, we can take that as done, and then we can proceed. Hopefully, when we need to do the closing, we can take the National Anthem at that time. So this is the agenda we are going through today for the sake of our participants who are just joining us. We've started with the welcome and the National Anthem, which we will take subsequently towards the end. We are going to shortly call on Mr. Frank Aigbogun for his opening remarks, after which I will present the context for today's conversation, and then we'll move on to the panel session, after which we'll be able to take, we hope, questions from our participants and then wrap up. The main objective, as I said before, it's not just to highlight the challenges. I think almost every Nigerian can do that. We also want to be solution-driven, particularly the ones we consider can move the needle, and also the ones that we can implement in the short term, while also keeping in view the reforms that are needed in the medium to long term. And we're joined by the panelists, as you see on the screen, and then that's about it. So I have the pleasure now of inviting Mr. Frank Aigbogun, who is a board member of the NESG and a very well-known person, publisher of the Business Day, to please give us his opening remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Opening remarks by Mr. Frank Aigbogun, board member, Nigerian Economic Summit Group. At the 28th Nigerian Economic Summit, NES 28 pre-summit event themed Critical Tax Reforms for Shared Prosperity, now holding today, the 10th of August. Heads of ministries, departments and agencies, captains of industries, heads of associations, donor communities, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the board and management of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, NESG, I am delighted to welcome our distinguished and erudite panelists and our highly esteemed participants to this August event titled Critical Tax Reforms for Shared Prosperity, hosted by the Fiscal Policy and Planning Thematic Group. This is one of the pre-summit events of the 28th Nigerian Economic Summit, NES 28, jointly organized by the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, NESG, and the Federal Ministry of Finance, Budget and national planning, geared towards engaging stakeholders in a series of virtual conversations and sessions in the weeks leading up to the 28th Nigerian Economic Summit Group, NES28, which is scheduled to hold in Abuja from October the 24th to October the 25th, 2022. If you have not registered, kindly go to nesgroup.org/28 to pre-register now. Nigeria's expenditure has been on the rise. So too has been poverty. On the other hand, tax revenues are currently inadequate and far from their potential, limiting the government's ability to address critical challenges facing the people. Tax revenue is critical for the government to finance its activities and meet development objectives for shared prosperity. As you know, when revenue is optimized and tax system is correctly designed, the government has the ability to raise the required revenue to meet its objectives and promote the efficiency of government and, of course, the economy. Nigeria has made significant strides in improving its tax system. The introduction of a yearly Finance Act and appropriation bill have supported the responsiveness of tax legislation to government objectives and promoted policy implementation. The tax framework and policy implementation can be strengthened further in three prominent areas, including addressing issues related to tax compliance, tax impediments to economic growth, addressing issues related to tax, addressing issues about taxation and support to households and enterprises. Ladies and gentlemen, you will agree with me that all around the world, parliaments almost on a daily basis deal with legislation that directly affect tax, or even if you're talking about other legislations, there are always tax questions attached to them. The tax framework and policy implementation, however, Nigeria suffers from low tax compliance, contributing to depressed revenue mobilization. At 6%, Nigeria's tax to GDP ratio is lower than the average for African countries, which currently stands at about 18%. Low tax compliance and poorly designed tax concessions can trigger unfavorable economic conditions, as recently observed in Sri Lanka. With the persistence of low tax compliance in Nigeria, there is a need for a paradigm shift in tax-paying culture. Leading by example can play a significant role in driving up tax compliance in Nigeria. Consistent with the recommendations of the National Tax Policy, political leaders can support this cultural change through tax compliance by themselves. The structure of taxes should also promote economic growth and a business-friendly environment, especially for small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, who contribute approximately 50% of GDP and 84% of job creation. Tax policy reform is vital because taxes finance public education, healthcare, and infrastructure financing. These public services equip poor people with better skills and prospects in the job market and offer better chances to improve their economic status. This cannot be more important than at the time that we are in today in Nigeria. Taxes are also the financial backbone of social security networks and basic welfare, providing essential support to the poor against unexpected risk and preventing them from falling back into poverty during difficult times. However, policy weaknesses, lack of appropriate tax reforms, and public understanding are the main obstacles preventing these taxes from playing a more significant role in Nigeria's economic development. It is important for Nigeria to develop the right policy environment, including tax reforms, to remove the various impediments and reverse the worrying trend, and to do so urgently. To be effective, these interventions need to consider local economic, social, and cultural contexts, as well as enhance capacity for policymakers and tax administrators, leveraging on technology to ensure everyone benefits from the gains of development. The potential of tax reforms to alleviate poverty, reduce inequality, accelerate growth of SMEs, rejig the forex regime, and drive tax harmonization and compliance through political leadership remains untapped to a great extent in our dear country, Nigeria. Thus, this pre-summit event will engage relevant stakeholders to discuss how to address tax impediments to economic growth in Nigeria, deliberate on advocacy strategies to drive tax reforms through political leadership, and examine the possibilities of fiscal policy measures to ensure social development of our country. Once again, I extend our profound appreciation to every participant here today for accepting our invitation to share your knowledge, experience, and insights on tax reforms at this event in the national interest. Finally, I urge you once again to register for the 28th Nigerian Economic Summit through the NESG website to join other experts and stakeholders in articulating an agenda for Nigeria with clear priorities for shared prosperity in 2023 and beyond. May God bless the Federal Republic of Nigeria. I thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Frank Aibogon. That was a very good one. It seems like a good summary already that we can, start thinking about taking away for proper policy intervention. So issues around tax compliance, addressing impediments to businesses, whether they are large, small, or medium, and also how do you support the people, how do you make the country work for everyone, particularly the poor, the vulnerable, and small businesses. So I think this helps us to flow nicely into the context setting. And I think it's also something you mentioned, Mr. Frank, about ensuring that we consider local context, because I often say, jokingly, like an analogy, even if you're going to copy, you have to try and paste special, otherwise you may have challenges. So the context, therefore, is first and foremost for us to look at the economy, just keeping an eye on the time, to look at the economy, because tax itself, it operates within the context of the economy. So the macroeconomic indices are not what we like them to be. I think that's a known fact to everyone. From inflation to high unemployment rates, we think these unemployment rates will be higher than this now. This was based on the last report, which is now over a year. And therefore, combine the two, you have a high mystery index. Extreme poverty is increasing, all manner of data and figures everywhere. Public debt is rising. But Nigeria remains the largest economy in Africa, if that's any consolation, which means even with the fact that we're not optimizing and fully realizing our potential, we're still the largest. You can only then imagine what is possible if we get things right. And I do think that the most important things that we need to do will not cost government money. They're to do with policy reforms. Whether you're even talking about security, it's not spending more money that'll solve the problem. It's the policy, the coordination, the capacity, and how we work together. Same thing with fiscal and monetary policies. On monetary policies, then more specifically, we've seen challenges around devaluation of the Naira against other foreign currencies, particularly the US dollars. The other dimension to this conversation is the fact that because all major currencies, in fact, I should say all global currencies, are depreciating against the USD because of policy rate normalization. So US raises interest rates on treasury bonds, and then dollar flows in their direction away from the rest of the world. And that in itself means that the other currencies will depreciate. Euro was at parity at some point. So this is adding to the problem we already have in Nigeria. At some point, black market rate was over 700. Thankfully now, I think it's a little over 600, maybe 620. Foreign remittances, FDI, FPI are not coming as we expect them. We've seen the CBN trying to introduce various interventions from, diaspora remittances, get 5 Naira for every dollar to DRT 200. But then again, the point is, if you're having to do a lot of special interventions, that in itself is an indication that things are not working well, because you need to make the country work for everyone, to reduce patronage, and because if I don't qualify for certain interventions, you make my situation even worse to be able to compete in the market. External reserve balance and balance of payment challenges are there. We have multiple exchange rate windows, and the low interest rate regime is also another problem that is putting people more into poverty, because even when you invest, the real return you're getting is below interest rate, is below inflation rate, which means you're getting poorer every day. And we also know that inflation by itself, it's naturally regressive, which means poor people suffer more than the rich because they usually don't have investment in assets that can protect them from inflation. On fiscal policies, we deal with this persistent low tax to GDP ratio. Mr. Frank also mentioned that high debt service cost to revenue ratio in the first 4 months of the year. The FG spent 119% of revenue just to service debt. In other words, we indeed borrowed all the money we spent for everything else, from salaries to other overheads to capital expenditure. Yet we have earmarked taxes. The National Assembly, for some reasons I don't understand myself, seem to have been very busy introducing new taxes in the past, few months, a couple of years. On corporate, for example, we've seen, police levies on their profit. We've seen the one on engineering and science, NASENI. We've seen the one on, NYC. They say NYC needs to be funded, and then the private sector also needs to fund that. And even more recently, there's another one that was introduced for social security investment program, again, to be funded by the private sector as a percentage of profit. But there's really, you can't keep doing that in an environment where businesses themselves are struggling. So there's so much more that they can only take. Where the rest of the world are reducing corporate income tax rate to attract more investment, we seem to be doing the opposite. We also have multiple agencies trying to collect revenue, leading to inefficiencies, and tax morale is low. Sometimes the tone from the top doesn't help, like the presidential pardon to politicians who have been convicted. So this is not an allegation, they were convicted of stealing taxpayers' money. If you then pardon them, it just sends the wrong signals, both to the administrators, the law enforcement, but even more importantly, to the taxpayers themselves, who are going to be questioning why should they continue to pay tax if it was okay for anyone to take their tax money and get away with it. We also had the issues with tax clearance certificates for people who wanted to contest different positions. Many of them have never paid income taxes before. because they had no record to show for it. And the tax authorities pretty much said it was okay for them to pay nominal amounts and be given tax clearance certificates so they could go and contest. We've seen report by the Auditor General for the Federation showing that many MDAs are not tax compliant, even when they deduct taxes from their contractors and even their employees in form of PAYE, sometimes they do not remit. And we have other issues, including heightened insecurity, industrial actions. The university lecturers are being on strike now, going to 6 months. We also struggle with policy coordination, even within the federal government, legislature, executive, and also sub-national sometimes. How do you coordinate with the states and local governments? Petrol subsidy is getting out of hand if it's not already out of hand. And the latest report by the World Bank, and we have Mr. Raju with us, shows that Nigeria has now moved up in the IDA list. So we've borrowed more than before. So our ranking, that's not a ranking where you want to be number 1. I think we're now number 4. We have other development around the African Continental Free Trade Area and the unified payment system within Africa. These are positive developments, but we also have to bear in mind we have the global geopolitical tension that's creating ripples around the world. And whether you like it or not, those things are affecting all of us. First, Russia and Ukraine, and now many of us, including myself, are praying very hard that the escalation in Taiwan will be put under control. We just can't afford anything happening again. If you have anything between China, Taiwan, and the US getting involved, it will be too much for the world to handle. While we're just recovering, barely recovering from COVID, and then there's Russia and Ukraine, you can't afford any other thing on top of that. So the economy, from my perspective, is shaped generally by 5 big factors. And I thought about the big 5 animals, right? So there's debt and taxes, there's politics and policies, there's geopolitical crisis, there's insecurity, and then subsidies. Without having to go through one by one, if you think about subsidy, I do think that the true cost of subsidy, even the financial cost, I'm not talking about the non-financial cost, is underreported. So why is it underreported? The NNPC is treating PMS subsidy by way of under recovery. In other words, they sell crude and take our dollars to buy refined products. So they are taking our dollars at the official rate of 415, 420. So that in itself is an FX subsidy, because even manufacturers can't get dollars at 420 to buy raw materials and inputs, right? So that's essentially FX subsidy is not captured. Number 2 is the fact that around the world, data shows that different countries impose between 20 to 80% taxes. So the pump price when you buy PMS in most countries around the world, between 20 to 80% of the pump price you pay is actually taxes. In Nigeria, there are no taxes on fair product. That's a subsidy. We're not quantifying it. And if you put all of this together, and also remember that because government is borrowing significantly, it means that by paying the subsidy, you reduce the amount of revenue that goes to FAC for government to share, and therefore government is having to borrow. If you add the borrowing costs, which is double digits from government, to the subsidy cost, you then have the subsidy as currently being reported, plus FX subsidy on it, plus tax subsidy on it, plus the cost of borrowing. It will be almost twice as large. It's just not affordable for this country as it is. So, and it's something that we have to deal with urgently as best as possible. The fiscal landscape. So while I was trying to prepare for this, I thought, well, we shouldn't all sound like everything is negative. We need to also highlight the things that we have done that are working. And so I prepared this slide to focus on them. So while within the economic context, we have a mix of different things, deficit, trade issues, forex, inflation, unemployment, insecurity, but we have made some progress in key areas around the tax system. like the voluntary asset and income declaration scheme that was introduced around 2016, 2017, helped increase the tax awareness and actually brought in quite a good number of people into the tax net that were not previously within the tax net. The national tax policy was introduced and approved in 2017, pretty much setting the tone for the Nigerian tax system, and some progress are being made in implementing those provisions as contained in the national tax policy. And that has led to the annual changes that we see through the Finance Act. And some of those have helped to deal with critical issues, including, for example, the exemption of people who earn 30,000 or less from personal income tax was done via the Finance Act, as well as exemption of small businesses from VAT. If your turnover was less than 25 million, you didn't need to register. So these are some of the positive reforms we have seen. We have seen improved coordination at the sub-national level by the Joint Tax Board, bringing the tax authorities together to speak with one voice. And some of their recent intervention was, how do you get politicians to pay the right amount of taxes? And the JTB secretary has been able to join us today. I will be sharing her perspective with us on some of the progress they have made. We have seen improved capacity for revenue mobilization by FRS and the State Internal Revenue Services. We've seen FRS collected, at least in nominal terms, the highest amount of revenue in their history. And for many months, we've seen the Federal Allocation Committee being funded almost exclusively from tax revenue. That is progress. We also do admit that there's still a lot more that we need to do. The taxation of the digital economy, progress have been made again. Nigeria did not sign the inclusive framework for very good reasons. So I, for one, say that sometimes you don't need to agree with government's decision, right? But you just need to understand. And when you see that the basis for these decisions that have been made are compelling, and it gives you the comfort that things are not being done haphazardly. We've also seen the significant economic presence order introduced in Nigeria for taxing the digital economy. And we see government is continuing to work on the reforms to improve that. And the FRS also is trying to use intelligence to make sure that people do not evade taxes. Tax breaks for the poor and SME, I've already spoken to that. However, I need to say Nigeria's tax base remains small and faces structural problems. And that's why we have very little fiscal space to do more. So we've seen countries where government is introducing intervention to help with cost of living crisis, because if you don't address that, it becomes a social crisis and it can actually bring down the government. But we don't have the fiscal space. The intervention that we have at the federal government level for the poor is extremely limited. And many of us hold the view that actually giving money to the poor people won't solve their problems. They need something more fundamental than that. So we have all these many changes in the tax system. I think this is just for reference. I'm not going to go through them. Some of them to do with policy and administration, legislation and regulation, case laws, and other developments. This is where I want to try and wrap up my context before we then go into the panel session. Now, this, in my view, are the critical fiscal issues we need to think about. First, around tax harmonization. How do we ensure that the number of taxes are limited to very few broad-based, properly designed taxes? There's really no point having 60+ taxes across all levels of government when indeed 98–99% of your revenue come from less than 10 taxes. What you then do is you make the people and businesses pay more, but government collects less. The rest of it disappears to inefficiencies, into people stealing the money for their own purposes. And that's why when Nigerians say they pay a lot of taxes, they're not lying. Government says we collect so little. Government is also being honest. But how can both be right? People pay a lot, government collects so little is because it disappears in the middle. So we need to address this very urgently by limiting the number of taxes as well as the number of revenue agencies. Why don't we just have one revenue agency at the federal government level collecting all taxes? In fact, in many countries, even levies and charges, including fees. Rwanda Revenue Authorities, said to us recently that even when you want to pay to get your passport, international passport, you pay through the revenue agency. We shouldn't have to deal with this. And then taxing right for, state, local government, federal government, as well as statutory charges. So every time a new law is enacted, it says private sector should pay additional tax on their profits. And then it says that 1% is taken from the federal allocation, 0.2%. You can't keep taking money from the federal allocation to address different interventions. The structural challenges include regressive taxes. Many of us are aware that the governors, a few days ago, issued advisory to the federal government. And I went through the advisory and I said, well, this is part of the structural problems we have. The governors are essentially recommending that we introduce a federal income tax of 3% on anyone who earns more than 30,000 naira. Now, you cannot introduce a flat 3% on anyone who earns more than 30,000. That is regressive because it means you're making the poor people pay 3% and the richest people also paying 3%. That's not done anywhere. And then you're saying that we should repeal. I thought that was quite interesting. Repeal the personal income tax at the state level and introduce a sales tax of 10%. Again, sales tax is regressive. And that VAT should be increased to 10% with a plan to take it to 15 and 20%. I think it's good for the governors to share their thoughts, but we have to, again, put everything within the context of what do we want as a people? What do we want for our country? What's in our interest to protect the vulnerable, to make everybody pay their fair share, and to make our tax system progressive rather than regressive. We see widening tax gap, and rising costs of collection, as well as rising costs of compliance. So this is two-dimensional, right? There's the rising cost of collection by the administrators, that's government, and there's rising cost of compliance by the taxpayers. Both of these don't work in the interest of the country. So we then need to improve vertical and horizontal coordination. Then constitutional amendments, the lawmakers are still trying to amend our constitution. Part of what they're trying to do is put VAT on the exclusive legislative list. They want to establish revenue courts for federal and states, and then the role of RAMFAC, within the revenue space. At the sub-national level, I already mentioned the proposals by the governor, so I won't repeat that. There's increasing focus on fiscal federalism. But in Nigeria, that is interpreted only in one direction, which is people say more powers to the states. And I have nothing against that. But fiscal federalism or federalism in itself is not about more power to one level of government. It's actually about which level of government is most appropriate to handle any particular public service or activity. And then once you've assigned those activities, you then give commensurate revenue for them to support those activities. PMS, subsidy, getting out of hand. But even more interestingly is NNPC and the new NNPC Limited. And I put up a post recently on my social media account, just doing some analysis about NNPC, and I was comparing this with Saudi Aramco. So Saudi Aramco in 2021 made net income and paid taxes and all of that almost close to $200 billion. Their revenue was $400 billion. Saudi Aramco, does about 9.2 million crude oil barrels per day. So if you just calculate the equivalent for Nigeria, right? And say Nigerian government holds around 60% in most of the oil blocks. So that gives you close to 1 million barrels per day that belongs to the federal government of Nigeria. So proportionately, NNPC should be, the market cap of Saudi Aramco is now about $2.5 trillion. So NNPC should be at least $250 billion, generating revenue of not less than $40 billion and paying taxes and dividends to government close to $18 billion. Just imagine that for a moment. What that even means is, if we have that level of efficiency and you sell even just 20% of NNPC to the public, you raise enough money to pay off Nigerian debt if you want to pay off the Nigerian debt, right? And then the other thing you find there as a positive will be the fact that you create in that process, the efficiency you get will create employment, you do local refining, you diversify the activities of NNPC, and the possibilities are almost endless. Even with the whole conversation around green energy, there's a lot of roles, significant role for us to play as a country. Using tax intelligence for tax expansion, Mr. Frank mentioned the fact that there is non-compliance. That is true. There's also evasion. So because we're not using intelligence enough to connect the dots about what people are doing. And finally, tone from the top needs to get better. I already spoke to the presidential pardon. I feel pained as a Nigerian myself. Then politicians not paying the right amount of tax. It's not just about the money they will pay, it's the fact that when you don't have people with the right task culture in leadership, then they cannot solve our problems because they don't understand what it means to pay taxes, let alone presiding efficiently over taxpayers' money. That then affects the tax culture and the low tax morale. And we end up taxing poverty. No country can become rich by taxing poverty. So when you introduce policies without thinking about the impact on the vulnerable, you expose the country to bigger problems. So if you look at the threshold for extreme poverty, which is now at about $2.15 per person, and the fact that the average household in Nigeria is about 5 people, and based on employment and underemployment rates, about 2 people will be employed if you're lucky, right? 2 people employed in a household of 5 people, poverty rate at $2.15. If you calculate that in Naira, anybody who earns 70,000 Naira or below, if they are being taxed, you're taxing extreme poverty. You're not protecting them. If people can't feed, they cannot be rational. When people are not rational, you cannot have security and progress. The other one is the recent introduction of excise on telecommunication. Again, my view, which I've shared with government before, is if you have to do this, why don't you start with post-paid services? So you protect people who are trying to buy data just to earn a living. Or you could establish a threshold that says you only pay this excise on telecommunication once you exceed a certain threshold per month, again, to protect the poor and the vulnerable. I think these are important ones. So the critical question, as we move into the panel session, is what are the critical tax reforms we need to implement for us to have inclusive growth and shared prosperity in the short, medium, and long term? So I would ask you now to please join me in welcoming our panelists. So first, we have Mr. Segun Ajayi Kadri, who is the DG of the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, and he will be represented by Dr. Segun Oshidipe. We had invited Right Honorable Abubakar Suleiman, who is the Chairman Conference of Speakers of State Legislatures. I'm not sure he's able to join us, and I'm not aware that we have a representative, and so we'll progress. We have Mr. Raju Awasti, who is the Senior Public Sector Specialist, Domestic Revenue Mobilization at the World Bank, based in Nigeria. Thank you for joining us. We have we have Mrs. Aisha Obomoge, who is the Executive Secretary of the Joint Task Board. And then we have Mrs. Chioma Ifeanyi, who is the founder and CEO of Accounting Hub. I would therefore invite our panelists to take their virtual seats on the panel for us to start the conversation. Right, so I'll start by asking our panelists to kindly give us their opening remarks, if they can keep this to 2 to 3 minutes max, just on the topic and also the context that has been presented. Let me start by asking Dr. Segun Oshidipe from the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria to please share his thoughts.
Thank you. And once again, good morning, distinguished panelists. It's a pleasure being part of this session. Like we heard earlier, representing the Director General Manufacturing Association of Nigeria, Mr. Shegun Ajayi Kadiri, who is unavoidably absent because today happened to be the same day that the National Council of the Association is currently meeting. By virtue of the mandate of its office, is expected to be there. I would like to first commend the organizers for the invitation and affirm that the overarching theme, critical tax reform for shared prosperity, is apt and timely, especially at this time that government is experiencing shortfall in revenue. And as a country, we are also experiencing, we are still witnessing high increase in the burden of national tax. And also, just like the opening remarks, coming from the opening remarks and the context setting, a time that the tax to GDP ratio, it's pretty low. It's not all that bad, all the same. It's also good to also commend government, like I think Mr. Taiwo mentioned earlier in context setting. It's not all that negative all through. Commend government for a series of tax reforms introduced in the last few years, and particularly maybe because of the sector I represent, the overwhelming consideration and concessions given to SMEs to ensure that they have some sort of soft landing to also be able to operate within the economy. Critical to, when you look at the team, the overarching team, critical questions that we really need to begin to ask is, what is the ideal ratio, that is tax to GDP ratio, that should be set as a target for the country, given the structure and the nature of our economy. The second that also readily comes to mind is, how do we set machinery in motion to gradually move Nigeria to the desired ratio without increasing the threshold of pain points of industries and Nigeria in general. The third that looks more like it also is, how can we widen the tax net in a manner that resistance from the populace will be at the barest minimum. Of course, it may be expedient while looking at this to also look at countries that have better ratios and what they are doing differently. I would like to stop here as the opening remark to create room for others to make their comment.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Shegun Oshidipe, for that intervention. Speaking mostly there as a manufacturer and also representing the SME sector. And I'm just going to invite Mrs. Shoma Ifenyeze, who also does a lot with the small businesses. I'll even say in more details than maybe anybody else that I know. So to just speak from, first and foremost, your initial remarks, and subsequently we come to a little bit more specific comments around issues affecting SMEs.
Thank you. Good morning, panelists. Good morning, participants. Thank you so much for having me speak here. Listening to the review, the economic review about Nigeria, it looks like everything is on a downward. And then you go to the part where you talk about the big 5 factors that shape the Nigerian economy. It looks like all the 5 things, even though we had 5 giant animals, they seemed like small animals. But there's one sentence I like to hold on to. Nigeria remains the largest economy in Africa. That sentence brings me so much joy. The SMEs form a huge part of these economic activities that we talk about in this largest economy in Africa, which is our Nigeria. I'm glad to be speaking here today to lend my voice for the SMEs. If we are really talking about critical reforms that will bring about prosperity, and we are saying that Nigeria remains the largest economy, and we are saying that SMEs form a huge part of this large economy, then I'm so glad to be speaking for SMEs here today. Thank you so much. Another thing that gives me joy is the part where we talked about how annually the Finance Act brings about changes. So this isn't the years before when it took forever to have one little change in the tax laws. This is exciting for me to come from the SME perspective and share my views and believe that someone is going to listen at the next NES, and then maybe the next Finance Act will have something, that has changed in it to become more friendly for SMEs. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you very much. And that's spot on. The essence of this is not to come and lament. It's okay to highlight those challenges, but more importantly, solution driven. And I can assure you the plan for us is after this session today, we'll collect the recommendations, again, prioritize them and actually send an input to the policymakers to put in the next finance bill for those that require legislative amendments. And for anything that requires only just policy and regulations, then they can actually introduce those even before the end of the year. So that's really the importance of this. So you're going to be seeing some of the issues we're discussing today playing out in the reforms over the next, the coming months. So thank you very much for that. Let me invite Mr. Raju for his opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Taiwo, and for this invitation and for this opportunity. I'm very happy to be here. I think a discussion such as this one is really, really critical. But I think, and I'm happy to see that the other panelists have spoken about and picked on the positives, which is always good. Of course, Nigeria is the largest economy in Africa. It's the largest country in Africa by population, and it's a critical pivot for Africa's progress. So there is absolutely no doubt about that. But I think it's important to also highlight that the government of Nigeria is really, from the public finance perspective, is really facing an existential crisis. Let's not try to paper over the situation and try to put rose-tinted glasses on the actual reality that the situation is. I want to share my screen. I'm going to just not take more than 2-3 minutes, but I think pictures tend to speak louder than words. And so in that vein, I just wanted to share just a couple of pictures that are there in the World Bank's Nigeria Development Update of the latest one of June. So, first of all, Nigeria is 115th out of 115 countries in terms of the average revenues to GDP ratio. So this is obviously, you can't go worse than that. So that's why I was saying, let's face the reality. The second thing is, and I think Taiwo referred to the problems of the subsidy. So despite the world's oil prices rising the way they have been, and you can see the dark blue graph going up, revenues have been coming down, the net revenues on oil and gas coming down because of the tremendous impact of the subsidy. So what's going to happen in 2022? The federation's revenues are going to be significantly lower. They were already very low, and Nigeria is already the lowest in the world amongst the 115 large countries. And this year, it's going to really be even lower than what it was in 2020 because of the debilitating impact of the fuel subsidy. So what do we need to do? And I think we are going to talk more in detail about the solutions, but I have here just a few very quick ones that I will refer to, and then I will stop after this, and we'll come back to the details later. First of all, on the non-oil side, value-added tax compliance gaps are immense. As per the report, the tax expenditure statement of the Budget Office of 2020, the VAT gap in 2019 was over 3.1 trillion, whereas the collection was 1.2 trillion. Of that gap, about 2/3, about 2 trillion, is coming from compliance gaps. So that's a huge important issue that needs to be addressed. And this is where, because of this, is why you have a low tax base and a few people feel they're being overtaxed. The second is we need to rationalize tax expenditures. Tax incentives need to be evaluated in terms of what are they delivering for the policy promises that they were supposed to deliver on. The third is on personal income tax. And Taiwo mentioned the recent proposal, but beyond that, the point is there needs to be data sharing between FIRS and the state revenue services. Companies, directors are individuals. They are taxed in the states. Where is the coordination? This is critical. This is critical to increase and improve revenues from the personal income tax. Property tax reforms, again at the state and local government levels. Critical. Nigeria has a tremendous potential. There's more than 50 million households. There's that many properties. There are many, many rich people who need to be paying property taxes. There's a tremendous opportunity here. Excise reforms. I think Taiwo talked about telecom. I will beg to differ. I think there's a need to have. Nigeria doesn't have an excise on telecom. Neighboring countries have excise rates of 10, 12%. So you need to, we need to find, handles to raise revenues. Otherwise, the minute we talk about raising revenues, there's always some excuse or some reason why that particular thing should not be taxed. Well, something has to be done. And finally, you just need to reform the PMS subsidy regime, moving towards full elimination at least by 2024. This is critical for this country. So let me stop here and hand it back to Taiwo. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Raju. Very good and important point you were able to speak to in a few minutes. And, I think on the excise, I do not disagree with you. My only issue is one, the timing and the design. So again, context is always very important. So if you have people who are struggling to survive because they are in extreme poverty, they can't give. People can't give what they don't have. So if you're going to introduce it, why not start with people who can afford it? So someone like me, I use a postpaid plan. I can afford an extra 5%. So when you have the economy recovering and you're seeing the progress, then you can then extend it to the rest of the population. I do know in East Africa, for example, they actually have these rates in double digits and their VAT is 17, 18%. So but all of that I do think has to be put within a context and faced over a period of time. So thank you very much for those interventions. I'll call on the Executive Secretary of the Joint Task Board, Mrs. Aisha Obomogie, to please share her opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Taiwo. Thank you, Mr. Taiwo, and good morning to all the panelists here. My name is Nana Aisha Obomogie, Secretary Joint Task Board. It's been a good and exciting presentation, especially the opening remark. It's rather amazing that we have come to this state in our nation. And basically speaking, we have engaged in tax reforms over the years, but it's like the tax reforms have always been on one side, because the purpose of tax reform is to improve the system of tax collection and to also improve on how the tax revenue is managed to address social issues. It's like the other side of this tax reform that is helping to solve, highlighting and helping to solve social issues has not really been considered in the past. And I think basically speaking from the opening remark and the context setting by Mr. Oyedele, it is that we should talk more on how to make sure that the tax reforms are given the human face and the poor is actually protected. But the question is, in a country where the GDP ratio of tax to GDP ratio in Nigeria is one of the lowest in Africa, that has, ironically, the highest population in Africa, where the average tax to GDP ratio is suddenly supposed to be around 18%, and we are hovering around 6%. So how do we raise the revenue and at the same time consider the masses and ensure that we get enough revenue to support the government? One of these areas is to look at the number of taxes. Like Mr. Oyedele said, I quite agree with you. We need to streamline the taxes. If you look at the taxes and levies collectible by the various tiers of government, the ones collectible by the federal will have 11, by the state we have 19, and by the local government we have about 21. And basically speaking, these taxes in administration, we don't even administer up to 20% of the taxes, frankly speaking. In that case, we need to actually look at those schedules and recommend to the government to clear out all these taxes and make them like 2-3 taxes. But at the same time, we need to build up a robust database where all the taxing authorities will key into and be able to raise the right assessment to collect the right amount of taxes that is needed. And I believe if we are collecting the right amount of taxes that is needed, the two sides of the divide on the social contract will ordinarily live up to their expectation. In this kind of modified social contract that we are operating, whereby the citizens pay less and ask less questions, needs to change. And that is what brought us to where we are today. And we need to change that narrative. Like not introducing more taxes or more agencies that is the solution as we are having today, but leveraging more on indirect taxes, where the poor feel less of the impact of those taxes. Like in Nigeria, we have over 200 and something handheld devices. And we could say that maybe the ones that are Android and iOS, maybe there is a law that an entertainment tax are supposed to be collected by the local government. But believe me that today, not up to 2% of that taxes is being collected. That is a tax that can be collected seamlessly without people feeling the impact, especially when you tie it to the time they are buying data. Unless anybody buying data around 5,000 should pay like 20 naira, they won't even feel it. And that will bring out immense revenue to all the tiers of government, though that tax of that tier belong to, that type of tax belong to the local government. But as we speak today, getting hooked up to the telecom is a Herculean task. Getting hooked up to the digital service provider is another issue. You know, we have these silos of data that if by today, these silos of data have been brought together and every tier of government is able to access the data, believe me, we will be able to generate enough revenue that we have to fund, or not at least the recurrent expenditure and service our debts. And we will know that the only deficit we'll be looking at will be the capital expenditure. And the sharing, as mentioned by Mr. Raju, sharing of data between the Federal Inland Revenue Service and the State Inland Revenue Service. We also take cognizance of that, and we are working assiduously to get that on board. And I bet you that in no time, that big data bank, the national data bank that will bring people to the limelight to pay the correct taxes will soon be up and running. But another thing is capacity building. We have challenges. Even the level of integration we've had now at the Joint Tax Board, we just did an analysis recently and we realized that out of the 27 state internal revenue authority that integrated to the database of the Joint Tax Board, we have up to 6-7 that have never pulled any data, not even a single data. Let me stop here and we'll talk more as we go on. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very, very much, Madam, from your hands-on experience, coordinating the various tax authorities. So that's a very useful one. I'm hearing this for the first time myself, that like 6-7 agencies haven't even, so you can imagine, how do you operate within a tax system? And you have some states, Internal Revenue Service is not either contributing data or not making use of the intelligence that we have. So how then do we raise revenue? So the data I always like to compare is South African Revenue Service, which is, South Africa is a smaller economy than Nigeria. They raised the equivalent of 14 trillion naira from personal income tax alone last fiscal year. 14 trillion. That's more than all the taxes we collected in Nigeria, FRS, all the states in Nigeria combined. Personal income tax alone. In Nigeria, that number has never crossed 1 trillion. And a lot of the reason why this is the case is that we're not using data and intelligence for tax compliance. So the people who make loads of money and they're not paying taxes, but the burden is placed disproportionately on the poor people who earn PAYE, and they earn minimum income, they don't PAYE, they're the one funding government. This data also came out during the launching of the VADES, and that about 96% of the personal income tax is coming from PAYE. We cannot continue like this. It's really allowing people to get away with tax evasion, and that should not be acceptable. So thank you very much. Now, what we'll do, we're going to move on to I'm going to just ask each of our panelists one question to try and address in about 4 minutes, thereabout. And after that, we'll come to our participants and take questions from them before we wrap up. I'm going to start with Dr. Segun Oshidipe. The Manufacturers Association of Nigeria have been very vocal, so they speak up every single time, which is that's the right thing to do. They speak up about policies, the impediments they are facing, and in the opening remark, Mr. Frank Aibogun told us about the fact that it's important to enable businesses, and I don't think anybody would disagree. But as Mr. Raju also said, there's never a convenient time to introduce a tax or to increase the rates. People would always find a reason to tell you why it is not right for government to do it. So my question to you is, how do we strike a balance? From manufacturers' perspective, what is the balance you think we can strike to enable government mobilize revenue to run government, while we also allow the private sector to thrive so we can tax their prosperity later on? And what will be your key ask? What is the prayers or the requests you have for government that you'd like us to put forward to them? Over to you, Dr. Oshidipe.
Thank you, Mr. Udele. I would like to start by, first of all, saying that the intervention from Mr. Raju based on the extra from the last NDU, it's quite valid when you look at the current precarious situation that we have found ourselves as a country. We need money, no doubt, but also I think it's expedient to look at the timing of such taxes. I would like to say, yes, there's need to strike a balance. Government needs more revenue, no doubt, and all hands must be on deck to bake a larger cake that will also add value to the entire economy. But however, in doing so, I think there are critical things that we need to consider. Number one is that in the process of increasing the size of the cake, it should be done in a manner that will pay due attention to the structure and the status of our economy. For example, I hear people say, for example, that you look at the gap between what we do VAT rate now and what other countries are paying. If you look at countries like Turkey, Malaysia, China, you may say they are far, far, far from us. And you look at even our brother, South Africa, you look at the per capita income. For those countries, Turkey, Malaysia, China, the per capita income is as high as close to $11,000. When you look at the national minimum wage, it's hovering for this country, still hovering between about $350, $380 dollar. In the case of Nigeria, it's just about $85. And you look at the competitive, global competitive next ranking, which Mr. Raju alluded to earlier, see where we are. So we need to ensure that the beauty of looking at some of these indices is that it helps us. For example, when you look at the personal, the per capita income, you look at the disposable income of Nigerians currently and the national minimum wage, it helps us to understand, to appreciate the likely implication of upward review, instant upward review without taking into consideration all these indices. So in a nutshell, yes, there's a need to pay more cake, but we need to look at our current status before we just jump on the train to increase. The second one is that to the Manufacturing Association of Nigeria, the expectation is that taxes should be structured. Yes, we need to tax more to get more revenue, increase revenue, but should be structured to take more resources from the rich than the poor. For example, we look forward to a situation where it's more targeted at ostentatious goods, luxury goods. I mean, those that have more income, earn more income by one way or the other, to also pay more. The other one is there's need for us as a nation to sit at the table and agree that we need to develop a comprehensive and integrated framework that will facilitate the intentional movement. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, the intentional movement of operators in the informal sector to the formal sector. Whether we like it or not, the huge sums of money, transactions are taking place within the informal sector. And rather than overburdening the already compliant companies, I think Mr. Oyedele mentioned during the context setting, if you look at the gamut of taxes that are levied on companies, they are huge, over 12, and additional ones are still coming. Every institution, the moment the act is approved, you are just levying the tax on the company tax. So in a nutshell, there is need to develop a framework that will make us as a nation to find a way to move those operating in the informal sector to the formal sector. I think that will make us to bring in more revenue for government through tax. The other one is we need to also, well, it's related to that, we need to widen the tax nets rather than increasing the tax base or the tax burden of existing taxpayers. The last one from my end is we need to promote, I think someone mentioned that earlier, we need to begin to promote harmonization of taxes, levies, and fees payable by businesses in Nigeria so that we can attract more investment. Of course, I can but also say there's need for consultation. It's no longer when you have a situation that you have a problem at hand like we have now, there's need for all the stakeholders to come on the round table, on the table from the public, private sector, to sit together to look at how, not a situation where you just open the newspapers and the next thing you hear is that these have been introduced and everyone is running helter-skelter. And oftentimes, those new taxes have far-reaching implications on the processes, the system, and even a lot that had to do with the process of business in the private sector. I think I would like to stop here. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Dr. Sidipe. Those were very, very important points. I particularly like the context that you brought into it. Yes, it's okay to design the tax system, ask everybody to pay, but bear in mind the local context. What's the per capita income? What's the minimum wage? What's the level of poverty? And also to make it to be progressive, why we also try and facilitate formalization so that you can, transfer some of the informal taxes into formal taxes. If you make the informal sector to be formal, so you automatically make their informal taxes become formal. And also widen the tax net. The biggest opportunity for government to raise revenue is not new taxes, it's not higher rates, it's the non-compliance gap. That's where the biggest amount of money is. And I do think that even if government can make efforts to reduce the tax non-compliance gap, then you have every excuse to then say to people, I've tried my best, right? And here is all we can get. Because like Mr. Raju said, not only is our tax to GDP ratio the lowest of the 115 countries considered, our public expenditure to GDP is also one of the lowest. So government can't take care of the people because they just don't have the money, right? So, but if government can demonstrate that they're not going for the easy solutions, it's easy to just amend the law and introduce a new rate, increase the rate, that's easy. But the hard work is ensuring that you limit the compliance gap, you address the inefficiencies, right? And then Nigerians will see that you have been able to do your best, you're spending it to take care of the people, and maybe then it's justified to introduce more taxes. So thank you very much. And the point on consultation and collaboration is spot on. I've been involved myself trying to help the private sector, and the exercise that was introduced on non-alcoholic beverages, the sector was trying to even meet with government to say, what is the guideline for paying this tax? For almost 6 months, they couldn't get a meeting. And when they were invited for a meeting, I know this because I was involved, the CEOs flew to Abuja for a meeting that was supposed to take place around 2 p.m. And they were told just about 1.5 hours to the meeting that the meeting has been canceled. And, I just couldn't understand it. How do you do that to your taxpayers? So even when people want to pay the taxes, the processes are not straightforward. The exercise on telecommunication will be the very first exercise on services in Nigeria. Excise taxes in Nigeria are collected by the Customs Service. The Customs Service has zero experience in collecting excise on services. They're used to collecting excise on goods where they can physically go and sit down at the factory, right? So that whole thing about capacity building, who is best placed to collect it, I've said that if we must introduce excise on services, it should be collected by FRS. They're the ones who understand how to look at the books. All these issues could have been better addressed with proper consultation and collaboration. It's not us against them, right? It is us working together, private sector, government, tax agents, administrators, everyone working together for one common purpose. So thanks a lot for those interventions. I'll move on to Mrs. Ifeanyi Eze to just build on that, because you deal with a lot of small businesses, and every single time we listen to government will tell us we're supporting SMEs, but sometimes when you also relate with small business owners, they don't seem to feel the impact of government intervention because they're still having to deal with informal taxes, they're having to deal with illegal taxes, I should say, and they're having to deal with implicit taxes where they're taking care of what they think government should be doing for them, and therefore they don't see reason why they should pay. So the question I'm going to ask you is, from working with small businesses, what in your view are their top concerns when it comes to tax matters and the tax environment, and what do you think small businesses would like to see government do as a way of addressing their challenges?
Thank you so much, Mr. Oyedele. I think that the biggest problem that small businesses have with taxes is poor education. They do not understand what to pay, how to calculate it, the processes to follow. They are absolutely gray. You know, sometime I conducted a research where I brought together 100 business owners. And I said to them in a room, how many of you want to pay the correct tax if you know exactly what to do? We had over 60% of people want to pay the right tax. They don't know what dates, how, what, they don't know what to do. It looks like every time the tax authorities are implementing anything, they're either trying to increase collection or increase how punitive measures. There is rarely anything I see increasing education. It is always, let's collect, let's penalize. Now generate this code, use it for here. All of that is to increase collection and increase how you punish offenders. But rarely are they increasing anything that talks about education. How can they solve this? From the point at which a small business is incorporated at CAC, why don't I get a phone call? Hello, dear small business owner. You have just signed up as a business that does food processing. Here are the taxes that impact on you. Isn't that simple enough? Now the CAC is already giving the TIN numbers. From when you are incorporating, you get a certificate that has your TIN, right? In fact, I notice now they are writing it at the bottom of the certificate. Why don't we get some little tax education at that point? Wouldn't that help at that point? Why do you allow the business owner to incorporate his business, go in and start running without knowing anything? 3-4 years down the line, you appear and bring a long list of all the things he has done wrong when you could have intervened at the beginning. How many times has the taxman walked into an SME office and what he came to tell me was to educate me and not to roll out a paper with all the things I have done wrong? Where is the education? How can we educate more? I remember when the first Finance Act was released, I just went in there, made a table, and on this side, on the right side, on the left side, I listed out, I copied and pasted what the law said. And then on the right side, I wrote it in simple English. So the law says this is what it actually means. That little, you know, it was an Instagram post that you can swipe 10 times. It went viral. Why? Because small businesses could relate with it. Oh, is that what they are saying? They don't even understand all the big English in the policies. So when you write it in simple, you say, is that what it means? So you tell a bakery owner, do you know that bread is VAT? He says, madam, I didn't know. So they don't even understand these things. Education is important. When you roll out all the voluminous laws, it means nothing to them if you are not educating for them to be clear. And I've explained how we can educate even from the point at which they are incorporating, even from the taxman who comes to tell me all the things I've done wrong. Why doesn't he come ahead or email me ahead? Now the tax authorities are collecting data of the SMEs from incorporation. Email me some education. Get people like me to make videos and teach them what to do. And let these SMEs, as you're incorporating, watch these videos and learn from the beginning. And it would drastically, there are many people. What is the tax, the PAYE on somebody who earns 50,000 Naira? Maybe 530, something really little, insignificant. A business owner would gladly pay that. Why will I have a staff who earns 100,000 Naira a month? His PAYE is 6,500. If I'm not doing pensions, if I'm doing pensions, maybe a company that has more employees, it reduces. Why won't I remit that? It doesn't come from my pocket. It's part of the employee's salary. Why am I paying it to the employee? Ignorance. It doesn't cost the employer more than that 100,000, but they are not educated. If we do more on education, we would drastically increase the taxes. The next point I like to talk about is the tax policies and the tax laws. They do not trickle down to the processes that the SMEs meet at the tax offices. The tax policies and the tax law, you sit down, you make some law, you publish it, but is it really happening at the tax offices? Okay, you have gone now to connect the CAC with the FIRS, and we are automatically getting TIN issued to small businesses at incorporation. Brilliant. You have collected all the data you need. Why is the tax office still penalizing me when I come there after 6 months, saying I didn't come to register? Register what? Didn't you collect all my details at incorporation? Why should I go to the tax office to go and register again? What is the essence of generating an automatic TIN for me? You know, all of these things. So the big people at the top are rolling out the policies and, you know, the laws, but is it trickling down to the tax office? Is it, you know, is the small business owner still finding it easy? No, he's not. You have forcefully given him a TIN, forcefully registered him in Ajangbadi tax station when his office or his business is in Lekki. That is 3 hours away. That's fine. He's managing to deal with that. After 3 months of remitting his tax online and filing, he goes to the tax office, say, please, I need a VAT certificate to give this business I'm working with. They say, oh, your penalty is, I have penalty. What have I done wrong? They roll out the penalty and you don't know what you have done wrong. So that's the second point. We need to align the policies and laws you're making. Does it trickle down? And are you mass educating so that people are clear what their right is? The third thing I like to talk about is the length of time that it takes an SME to get anything you require from the tax offices is too long. I believe that the tax authorities should start to think about a give and take mentality. You want to take taxes from me, please give me the support to run my business. I need TCC quickly so I can get the next contract and do my business and pay you the tax. Give me the TCC quickly. What is the point that I've paid everything I should pay, filed everything I should file, and I'm begging for TCC for 9 months? And you want me to keep paying? How? Can you create a department that focuses on helping people, you know, be better at their businesses? Not just only take. Can you give? What can you give to me to make my business better? I just need VAT certificate from you. I need TCC on time from you. Give it to me. Look at the turnaround time that you're using to process these things that help the business of the small business owner and make it shorter so that it would help us. Don't only be taking, give, and I will be willing to also give you my tax quicker. I know many people who, if the year is ending in December and I can file my taxes January and I can get my TCC in February, my business will do better. You will get more taxes from me. It's a chicken and egg situation. But when I have to wait for the TCC till August, September, and I've lost many businesses, then you get less taxes from me. I hope that this helps. Finally, the last point I like to leave us with, I believe that it is still very difficult to remit taxes in Nigeria. One time I was asking someone, do you know that there is a platform dedicated to registering vehicle numbers? I don't know I've forgotten what that platform is called, where you register your vehicle. It's a platform that we all know, for auto-reg or something like that, where you register vehicle plate numbers. Please mention for me any platform in Nigeria that is solely dedicated to payment of taxes. I work as a tax consultant, consulting for hundreds of SMEs. They will pay their taxes into a collection account. We will go to Access Bank, join the queue to pay taxes. We would send 10 pages of lists to process taxes for different clients. We got totally frustrated. I had to send a pitch to Mr. Mitchell Elegbe of InterSwitch, begging him to give me a platform to process taxes in mass. Are you saying that someone like me, who has the taxes of 500 people to give to you, there is no platform that I can go to and massively import a list and pay you one bulk money to process? I need to go to maybe QuickTeller or a Remitter and be processing one by one. But there is a platform dedicated to registering vehicle numbers, but there is nothing dedicated solely to payment of taxes. Tax consultants will collect money, and we are struggling to give you the money. Please show me the Federal Mortgage Bank where we are going to remit NHF. Where is the place? How many branches are there? It's just a struggle to remit the taxes, even when we collect it. We have it, we can't give it, and we are crying that we want compliance to improve. I want compliance to improve. I am stuck with 100 million of people's money I want to remit, and I'm struggling to remit it. My staff has to go and queue at the bank to remit hundreds of taxes. So it looks like we are not ready to improve the compliance that we seek. Thank you so much for having me speak.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that very passionate intervention, and spot on. You know, some of the points you've shared, you know, you can only have those points if you are dealing with issues, and it's so obvious that you are dealing with the issues on a day-to-day basis. Unfortunately, when the tax system is designed, they put the elites on the table who sometimes don't understand these issues or can't be bothered. But thank you for sharing those, you know, points. And I see some of the comments from our participants supporting the points you've made. So one thing we can assure you is that we will take these points that you have made to the right places for them to receive the attention that they truly deserve. If you make it difficult for a small business to pay tax, you're not doing yourself any favor, because if a big business is paying 200 million naira, they can get a consultant that they pay 2 million to worry about that. But if a small business is paying 1,000 naira, where's the money to pay consultants? And then there's someone like you who is trying to help them, and you have to get a staff dedicated to go and join a queue, right? So it doesn't make a lot of sense for a country that needs all the tax revenue that they can mobilize. So thanks a lot for those interventions. I'll move on to the JTB secretary. I'll come back to Raju last. Madam, what I'd like you to speak to us about is the last, I believe is the last JTB meeting, where there was a conversation we saw in the press where the JTB is saying, how come politicians are not paying the right amount of taxes? What can we do to get them to do the right thing? Like I said before, it's not about the taxes they will pay, right? It's unlikely that the taxes politicians will pay will help us balance our budget, right? It's very unlikely. But it speaks to the tone from the top, and it speaks to the tax culture, which in itself can impact on the tax morale, that Nigerians will want to say, well, you know, our leaders are doing the right thing, maybe I should do my own as well. So what exactly are the things that the JTB is trying to accomplish? What progress are you making, and what timeline should we be expecting? I'm hoping that by the next elections, not this one, because I think we missed this one already, by the next election, we shouldn't have anyone who is a tax evader contesting for an office. Because again, I also think that when you get people who declare their income honestly and pay their taxes promptly as required by Section 24 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, it takes people of character to do that. What that means is not only are you getting people to pay taxes, you're getting the right people to be in governance. So please, Madam, your response to these questions.
Thank you, Mr. Yedele. I would also like to provide some solution to the points raised by the last speaker, Madam Chioma, but that will be done after I've answered this, my own side of the questions. It's true that at the last Joint Task Board meeting, it was really focused on how to make political office holders tax compliant, both potential and even the current political office holders. Because in Nigeria generally, and looking at the historical perspective, there is that resistance in Nigeria to pay tax. If you could recall back, there was the 1929 Aba Women Riot, and we have the Agbekoya Parakpo revolt of the 1968 and 1969. All these were all as a result of the colonial masters imposing taxes then. And I think maybe because thereafter the oil boom came in, nobody actually pay much attention to making the citizens to pay taxes, and because they don't pay taxes and you have the civil society not actually asking many questions about how their taxes are being used. And also the morale of tax morale is very low here, because when you go out to collect these taxes, people ask you certain questions, especially about those political office holders that you cannot even provide answers to. Like someone tells you, your lawmakers are taking away 30 million, 18 million, 15 million per month, and we are here. Yeah, you want me to pay taxes to support them? Oh, obviously speaking and truthfully, that answer will not be in the affirmative. So that is why we actually want the tax compliance to be more at that level, because actually they are to superintend, they are the one that appropriate the budget. They are to superintend on the taxpayers' money. So what morale do you have to use other people's money when you have not done your bits? It means that you are not really the kind of person that should be in that kind of position. That is why actually we are trying to make sure that the political office holder this time around, though the compliance system that we are building is all encompassing, both political and non-political office holders are made to comply when the national tax database or the national data bank is built and is running. Everybody will be made to pay its tax. That is one of the initiatives that we are running at the Joint Task Board called the Data for Tax Initiative. It is to link up 38 economic activities for the start, which hitherto are not linked to your identity. So we are doing that so that with a touch of button, all your economic activity, basically up to 90% of them, will be up, and we could raise the appropriate taxes. Like you also said, is sending the right messages to the other population that if my leaders are paying taxes, we the less should equally follow, because they are the one leading us. They should also lead by example, by paying the correct right amount of taxes. But you see, there are many factors that are aiding the low compliance level in Nigeria. That is why the tax to GDP ratio is that low, in spite of the huge population we have in Nigeria. We have silos of debtors. Every agency of government, the same government that want to generate money to run, head on strictly to its own silo of data and don't want to let it go on link with other agencies. In fact, by fiat, in fact, I was thinking by an executive order, not even waiting for the Finance Act. The agencies should all be asked to handshake together. Imagine if today there is a law compelling all the agencies to handshake. You mean the State Internal Revenue Services, the NEMC, the NIFS, Nigeria Interbank Settlement System, the Nigeria Identity Management System, the information in AGs. In fact, all the people having silos of data. If we are to link up today, irrespective of the fact that we have different tiers of taxing authorities, what we will come up with will not be the 8 trillion that we are generating in the nationwide in income taxes. And maybe when you add the non-income taxes, we come to 9-point-something trillion naira, whereas the budget is about 17-point-something trillion naira. That gives us a physical deficit in our country, and we resort to borrowing. We have borrowed to the extent that or even the entire recurrent is now being funded by borrowed funds. We are going nowhere. So we need to reset the whole system that we are having in order to change the tides and start moving it towards the level of development. Also, we have at the Joint Task Board, what we normally do when we go and host meetings, we normally showcase how tax money is used to carry out expenditure. Well, that one is also to help the citizens to motivate them to pay more taxes. Then we want to, we have established a zonal tax compliance committee and the joint task board, because we realize that leaving the fight for individual states on making the political office, potential and political office holders compliant will not be an easy battle. So the zonal tax compliance committee has been set up. We are waiting for information to actually kickstart the process. The terms of reference has been also agreed on. At that zonal tax compliance committee, we have 6 chairmen from the 6 geopolitical zones representing their geopolitical zones. So, together with, we have INEC, we have ICPC, we have the CCB. The function of this zone is to revalidate and approve tax clearance certificates for potential aspirants, so that before INEC accepts such TCC, they will see the signature of the zonal committee. That is why we went to, before the last board meeting, we were at INEC, we had a meeting with them and they promised to cooperate with us. But their cooperation is not really going to be that powerful, because they told us that in their own act, number one, they don't deal with aspirants, they deal with candidates. And in the INEC Act, they are not mandated to get TCC from the candidates for vying for a political post. That is another recommendation we want this summit to put to the National Assembly, that the INEC Act should be amended to make the presentation of the tax clearance certificate mandatory for people vying for political office holders, so that the function of the zonal tax compliance committee will be very, very seamless, and we have more backing. Then the engagement of political office holders by the joint task board, maybe whenever we go out for our usual meetings, has to maybe extended maybe to an interview section, whereby we ask you of your tax agenda before coming to the office, and how far you've actually done with that, just to enlighten the various public. And in line with the national tax policy, the INEC was also supposed to request from candidates their tax agenda before and during campaign, which ordinarily was supposed to make them reflect deeply on their campaign promises and think of how to get the promises fulfilled. So at the joint tax board level, we felt that if we do a lot of enlightenment, people who wants to vie for political office holders, we know that they are supposed to carry out their tax assignments, make sure that they pay the right taxes before even vying for the offices. You discover that it is when it is close to election time that they rush to any of the offices where they feel that they will get the cheapest tax clearance certificate to present to their political parties. It's as if it's now a commodity that you now shop for where it's lowest to buy, that you go to any of the nearest state internal revenue services, pay a nominal amount, and get your TCC for presentation. A TCC that is not even linked up with your asset that you have declared. A TCC that has nothing
Madam.
to do.
Sorry to stop you because we have only 10 minutes left, and I still want to take Mr. Raju. So thanks. We've noted the points you've made, and if there is anyone that is still want to share, maybe when you give your closing remark, I will try and take that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're most welcome. So I'll go to Mr. Raju. I think the World Bank has been very consistent in trying to nudge, Nigerian government in direction of trying to, address the unsustainable subsidy regime, revenue mobilization ideas. How can you manage our debt sustainably, right? So I suppose the question I have for you is maybe two aspects to the questions. One is, how can we balance our competing needs as a country? So you need to raise revenue, you need to administer social intervention for the poor, support, and then you don't have the money. Number two is, what can we learn from other clients that you think can work within our context? Thank you.
No, thanks a lot. And I will also share one slide where I have some more, just some details, sort of solutions. As you mentioned right up front, we want to get to solutions, not just identify problems. But I want to say one thing in general before, and this is looking at experiences of other countries. That we know very well that the Scandinavian countries raise some of the highest taxes in the world, right? In the range of 40 to 50% of GDP. So that's 10 times what a country like Nigeria raises. And when we used to have the Doing Business report on the paying taxes rankings, it is the same countries that are in the top 10 or top 15 in the world. So there is no conflict between having a system, a tax regime that can raise a lot of revenues for government, and yet having a system that is friendly to business and friendly to investment and friendly to growth. There is no conflict there. So when we talk about the balancing act, it is not something that is impossible to achieve. In fact, dozens of countries around the world have successfully done this. And how do you do that? You do that by using technology, we were discussing earlier, we heard about the problems of delays in tax clearance certificates. We heard about the problems of not having an electronic platform to pay taxes. Now, these are the kinds of problems that do not need to exist in a country like Nigeria, where we know how successful the IT sector has been. If we look at the private sector, if we look at the telecom sector, if we look at the financial sector, technology is paving the way for seamless customer-client interaction. So obviously, the capability exists, the capacity exists within the country. And I think these are the opportunities that Nigeria needs to take on. The second point is, you mentioned, Taiwo, about all these different earmarks. And the reason they're coming up is because there's no broad base and sufficient revenues are not being raised. That is why the government is resorting to these kind of, one tax on for this purpose and another one for that purpose. And that's just definitely not the right approach. So I wanted to share this one slide where just to talk us through some of the, and I wanted to, because I think this will address some of the issues that have already been raised. So first of all, when we talk about what can be done immediately, I think there's a huge opportunity to raise excises on sin goods. And here we're talking about beer and wine and spirits and cigarettes. There is a very tiny tax that has been introduced on sugar-sweetened beverages that could have been much higher. But these are the kinds of things where across the world, globally, there's a consensus that these rates should be higher because they're supposed to attack and address negative externalities of these products. The second is, and this is happening, the electronic money transfer levy. I think this will raise some revenues. The third, and this has been talked about a lot, I think there's a need to improve overall tax compliance. Now, the speaker from Accountants Hub spoke about the problems of the lack of education. Now, we are working with the FIRS through the ARMOR operation for developing VAT advisory visit programs, which means that FIRS officials will go to SMEs and educate them, explain them, this is not a visit, this will not be a raid or a enforcement visit. it will be an educational visit. FIRS is working. They've already developed a program, and they're going to be working on implementing this with our support. So there is already some movement forward in this direction. I think there's a need to reintroduce the VAT on premium motor spirits in line with the climate change agenda. This was exempted in 2018. I think there's a need to do that. Along with, in the medium term, we are, of course, in the World Bank have been advocating roll back PMS subsidies and ultimately get to the free market price. This is critical. Again, for the climate change agenda, but in the immediate and medium term, from the point of view of the public finances. There's a need to rationalize tax expenditures. I wanted to talk a little bit about what we are working on with the states through another program called SABRE, State Actions for Business Enabling Reforms, in which we are saying, let's eliminate all these different taxes and fees in the states for the small businesses, focus on a simple turnover-based tax, 2%, 3% of turnover, so easy to calculate, and have an electronic platform through which that tax can be paid for small businesses with a turnover less than 25 million. So these are the kinds of initiatives that we are working with the states on. I think there's a case for increasing the VAT rate, not today, not tomorrow, but in the medium term, to move towards the sub-Saharan African average. But as Taiwo was saying, let the government first demonstrate that they are making efforts and being successful in reducing the compliance gap. So let's work on that now in the immediate term, focus on that, get that, show the improvements, and then in the medium term, we can think of moving Nigeria to a higher VAT regime, but that should be accompanied with reforms on the input tax credit system, so it becomes a true VAT. And then in the long term, I mean, there's a lot to be done on modernizing and strengthening the various tax laws. I think Nigeria's tax laws are already pretty aligned with the international good practice, but there are things that can be done that will make the tax system more compliant with, more in line with, more aligned with international good practices, which multinational corporations look for. And that will also help to improve the investment climate in Nigeria. So let me stop here. This has been a really excellent discussion, and I thank the organizers for the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Raju, for that. I think those are very important points. Certainly, we need to, for some of the points, we need to consider the timing and also the context. I know the manufacturers have pushed back on the excise on non-alcoholic beverages, and they do have very compelling points. If you think about the fact that I can go to the mall and buy sugar, just buy sugar, and I don't pay any tax. So why is it now on production? And also, is the timing appropriate? On the same product like tobacco and cigarettes, again, the question of can you work with the industry to determine appropriate phasing? So the manufacturing sector has struggled, and they contribute the largest to the small size of the manufacturing sector we have today is beverage and food. So you may want to consider, is it the right time to increase their tax burden? Or should we have a conversation as to when that should happen and how that should be implemented? Unfortunately, we only just have a few minutes, so I'll see if we can take one or two questions and then we'll try and close. I think these conversations, you never have enough time to deal with all of them. So one question that I see here, someone says, can the FIRS Tax Pro Max platform create room for taxpayers to generate and pay any taxes due to them without necessarily visiting the tax office for assessment? Yeah, this is fantastic, really. Very similar to what Shoma was saying. In fact, as Shoma was saying that, I thought about the fact that there used to be the days that if you wanted to invest in the stock market, you needed to go to a stockbroker. And some guys just thought, why should it be that difficult? Why can't I just do it on my phone? And the increase in investment in the stock market became unbelievable. This is investment that is not a cost to you. People were not doing it because it was complicated. How much less taxes you want to pay tax is already painful. and then the process of paying it is unbelievable. It's not going to happen. So we really need to tackle that. I will take this recommendation to the FRS. I think it should even be possible for people to do it on their mobile phone. And those phones don't have to be smart. Like we see in East Africa, where with M-Pesa, you can even pay taxes on any kinds of phone. Unfortunately, our participants will not be able to take more questions. We'll try and look at your questions and address them. The few minutes that I have, I want to give our panelists just 1 minute each for them to say their closing comment, if any. They don't have to. And then I'll try and wrap up so we can close in the next 9 minutes. So I'll follow the order in which I ask the panelists to make their intervention. I will start with Dr. Segun Oshidipe. Your closing remarks, please. 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Levy. I would just like to say that it has been an interesting session. Just to also emphasize the fact that Nigeria knows that's at a crossroad when you look at the expenditure profile of government, the debt profile, and you look at it side by side by the revenue that is coming in. We don't have another country other than Nigeria. It therefore means all hands must be on deck to see how we can work together as one unit to provide solutions to this particular challenge of low revenue, particularly when you look at tax revenue vis-a-vis as a ratio of the GDP. But while we are doing that, it's expedient that we bring all the stakeholders on the round table and ensure that we look at the setting, we look at the timing, and we ensure that we are not putting over 200 million Nigerians on the edge in a manner that will push them further into the poverty lake. And from the private sector, like I mentioned earlier, we look forward to a tax environment that also supports friendly operating environment for businesses. Anyways, if businesses perform very well, they will generate more profit. And of course, it will translate to revenue to government. All of us have a role to play. It's just like the body. If the hand plays its role very well, the leg plays its role very well, and the head, of course, is properly positioned to give direction, then the body can assume the full glory for which it was created. It's a pleasure being part. Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting analogy. Thanks a lot. I'll call on Mrs. Chioma Rufai-Eze. Your closing remarks in 1 minute or less.
Thank you, Mr. Oyedele. So in closing, I'd like to say that contrary to popular opinion, SMEs, more SMEs than you think, are willing to pay the taxes. They only ask for 4 things: educate me, make the processes simpler for me, support my business, and use my money judiciously. If you do this, I believe that the compliance that we seek will go up the way to 60%. Thank you.
Excellent. I like the way you summarized it. Yeah, I think there's this wrong assumption every time we say informal sector, small business are not paying taxes. Actually, they want to pay. You know, look at that study you conducted. More than 50%, I think 60% or thereabout, are willing to pay. So we need to ride on the back of that to help them, to also help us and help ourselves as government. So thank you. I'll call on the Executive Secretary of the JTB, Madam, please, in 1 minute. I also wanted to try and address, someone asked a question of, can it be possible that the JTB will make it possible for taxpayers to use one identity? So maybe individuals can use NIN and companies can use their CAC registration for everything, so that we are not looking for tin here, we're looking for another one there. So as you make your closing remark in 1 minute, if you can address that, that would be great.
Thank you, Mr. Oyedele. At the heart of this discussion is the bringing on board of many taxpayers. Currently in Nigeria, we have 30 million. And the project we are embarking on at JTB called Data for Tax Initiative is intended to bring in about 90 million taxpayers out of the 200 million people we have in Nigeria. And we intend to also grow the revenue at a tremendous rate of over 300% of what we have now. But for that to happen, we need certain amendment to the legislation. So I'm appealing to this Nigerian Economic Summit group to back us so that the needed amendment to the legislation is brought to bear so that we can all handshake and have the National Data Bank operating in earnest. And one of the rider in that Data for Tax initiative is the use of one identity. Though there will be sub-identities, like the current state ID, it will still be there. We have the FRS ID, the TIN number, it will still be there. A BVN will still be there. None of them is going out. The NIN, it will be there, but the TIN, the JTBT will be the overrider that takes care of that every other identity will link up to. And we have one identity for the nation. And also, I would like the summit to also help us implement the national tax policy in terms of giving an act to the Joint Tax Board, because it's recommended that the national tax policy that the Joint Tax Board should have its act so that it can have power to carry out a lot of this initiative on board. But because without the amendment of the Joint Tax Board Act, we will not be empowered to carry out some of these activities that will actually move the nation significantly forward in terms of revenue generation and social consideration. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Madam. And Raju, you have the last word, your closing comments.
Thanks a lot. No, I'm just going to say just one sentence, and that is that I think going forward, the approach to revenue mobilization has to be more strategic. I think we've heard, the need to balance and the context, and I think that's exactly the point. We need to be more strategic. So Nigeria has to, it's not just about taxing more, but you need to tax better. You need to not just how much you are going to collect, but also how to collect it. And I think we've heard a lot during this discussion. It's not just about what to collect, but from whom. So, you cover that. So that covers the point about it has to be progressive, covers the point about it has to be efficient in terms of compliance, and it covers the point about making sure that we are targeting the right tax basis, and it has to be a broad tax base. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. To be honest, I don't know how to thank our panelists. This has been, I think this actually has exceeded my expectation. I like the way that the issues were very clear, it was targeted in terms of defining the problem, and even more importantly, what the solution should be. And I'm going to assure you that we have the commitment of the NESG working with all stakeholders to take these conversations forward, not just leaving them at the realms of idea, but to make sure that this can actually be implemented in a very practical manner, starting with the low-hanging fruit that we can do over the next couple of months to the medium and the more long-term interventions. So this has been very, very useful. A very big thank you to Mr. Frank Aigbogun for the opening remark, very, very useful. And again, to all our panelists, Dr. Segun Oshidipe, Mrs. Shoma Ifeanyi, Mr. Raju Awasti, and then Mrs. Aisha Obomege for sharing their thoughts and their experience and their insights with us. To the NESG team for putting all of this together, and last but not the least, to all our participants, for joining us and sharing your thoughts and your comments. We see all of them in the chat room, and your questions that we cannot answer, we'll try and address them off this event. And of course, the conversation continues, so do follow NESG. We'll share a lot about this conversation subsequently for those who may want to play it back, and also to discuss it within your own circle. And if you have any ideas and thoughts, do feel free to share those with us. Thank you very much for joining us today. We have come to the end of this session, and I will try, as we close now, to play the national anthem. If you don't hear it, just recite it on your own, and we close the session. Thank you very much, and do enjoy the rest of the day.
Okay, thank you.